right, welcome back everybody. How y'all doing? Good. Thanks for clustering up to the small tables. And we've got 45 minutes, and this is going to be me talking just a little bit and you all doing a lot of work at your own tables. So let me preface what this exercise is about. I used to provide workshops on something called meta assessment. And so what meta assessment is you look at an assessment report and you evaluate that report with respect to the assessment quality. And what happened in the past when I did this workshop is that it was very much looking at the trees of assessment. Like, let's see, how good are the student learning outcomes? How good is the curriculum map? How good is the instrument? But we were missing the forest perspective. So the forest perspective is, does your assessment report actually tell a learning story overall? Do the pieces actually fit from one piece to another? And so I've changed my approach about how I teach this sort of meta assessment process. Now the way I do it, especially when I introduce it, I do it through a much more holistic perspective. So each of you should have in front of you this program assessment report. It says example 1. And if you all can bear with me, what I would like you to do is just look at one report at a time, and I'll signal when it's time to go to the next report, okay? Because it's important for us to go together kind of one-on-one. And so I'm not making it a secret that as you go on with these reports, they keep getting better and better. But I want to ask you, what makes one report better than the one before it? And so holistically, you can see what makes one report better than the other. The other thing that you might know in this process is in a typical assessment report, you're probably listing out many different student learning outcomes, right? A program might have 4 student learning outcomes. It might have 10, it might have 20. But that's really hard to follow the track for all 20 student learning outcomes, for example. So I thought what we would just focus on one student learning outcome, but work it through the entire assessment process and then look at it in 4 different angles from different qualities of reports. Is everybody with me on that? So the worst one, which just so happens to be the shortest, is the assessment report, and the student learning outcome is on ethical reasoning. And for those of you who like trivia, I put some Easter eggs in there with respect to some of the faculty and department chairs are fairly well known. And so we can come back to that as well. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. Just look at the first report, and here's what you have to write these 3 things down. Here's the 3 things that you have to answer about each report. The first thing, what do you like about it? Number 2, what concerns do you have about that report? And number 3, give me a couple of suggestions about how that report could be better. Okay? And again, with this, just read one report at a time, because it's going to be very important for us together to be thinking about them. So just look at report number 1. I'm going to give you about just a few minutes to read through it and answer those 3 questions. Okay, looks like people are in pretty good shape there. They read that first report. It will be the shortest. So what did you like about this report? Okay, short. Yeah, hey, there's something to be said about short. Yeah, easy to read. Okay, what else about the report did you like? Yeah, sure. So from the effort side, probably you could say, yeah, that wouldn't be too hard to fill out. Sure. So it breaks down the areas to fill out. So that's good. Okay. One more positive. Okay. Easy to understand. Okay. So thank you for all those comments. So let's move to the next piece. What concerns do you have about this assessment report? Yeah. Yeah, there's no rubric. So let's see. What is the assessment method? It's a final exam in pop culture 2352, right? Yeah. Y'all get in the right neighborhood, right? It's like we don't even know what type of assessment it is. We don't know if the items on that exam actually map back to ethical reasoning, right? There's no map back and forth. Great. What else do you have a concern about? What's wrong with the outcome? Yeah, so there's all kinds of concerns about that outcome, right? I mean, it's not really a student learning outcome because it talks about what faculty are going to do as opposed to students. Yeah, so if you were a faculty member in that program and you were saying, "Hey, this is what you're going to do, teach ethical reasoning," does that give you any guidance whatsoever about what you're going to do? I mean, it's just so vague, right? Um, so yeah, so a number of issues with that outcome. Okay, what else? Yeah, yeah, yeah. So at least they're honest here, right? Courses, experiences that address this outcome. Hey, not sure. So here's a case where they're saying, here's this outcome that we hope is important to the program, but they have no idea what courses are supposed to load onto that outcome. Okay, anything else of concern? Yeah, it was very much monitoring, like, hey, I mean, at least they have a target for achievement, 80%. I don't know what that 80% means, but they got a target, and they say, hey, the last 2 years we've been exceeding that target, so everything's okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so it went down a little bit. I think they're making the argument it's still over the 80% target, but in terms of what 80% means, um, if it even measured ethical reasoning at all, we just don't know anything about that. Are y'all with me on that? Yeah. What's that? To make it better, yeah. I mean, one concern though is like they don't even know where students are getting any of this. Yeah. So something that I'll just point out is that C, A, and B. That's something that in the next session we'll talk a little bit more is about program theory. But we don't know what the student learning outcome is really, other than its ethical reasoning, nor do we know what interventions are being used to help students achieve that. And so, absent that, it's really hard to make sense of what any of the scores mean afterwards, right? So, let me stop right there, though, because now it's time to go to the second report. One more thing? Yes. Sure, sure. Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, there's a number of things that uh, are left are desirable that are not there. So what I'd like you to do now too, can you rip off that first page? And the reason I say that is so you can look at the first report while you're looking at the second report. Okay. So you have a new assignment now. I want you to read report number 2, and I want you to tell me how report number 2 is better than report number 1. A, and then B, tell me still what information do you need. Okay. So I'll give you a few minutes to work on that. Has everybody had a chance to look at this second report? Okay, now I forgot to do one really important thing for report number 1, and that is I forgot to ask you, who are these people? So the lead faculty, J.B. Jovi, who is that? Okay, give me one song that John Bon Jovi has sung. Yeah, there you go. And you're to blame. Okay, good. And then that department chair for example 1, who is that? Okay, give me one song. Girls just want to have fun. There you go. Great. Okay, so now the more serious stuff. Report number 2. So, what way is report, or in what ways is report number 2 better than report number 1? Does everybody see that? Okay, good. Got that. All right. What else? Yeah. So there's actually like a place that is planned for students to learn ethical reasoning. Right. Good. That's right. So they have an exit survey. So at least they specify the instrument, and they even have, oh my goodness, one item on ethical reasoning. Okay. Okay. What else is better about this? Yeah. So they're willing to investigate more. So it's at least a start in the sort of many steps to action. That's one of them, right? Good. Okay. What is left to be desired here? Sure. Oh, we'll pass the
And
mic around. So what's the issue?
they still don't have an operational definition of ethical reasoning. And also, they just missed the target.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, their exit survey is quite subjective because they're asking students what their perception is of understanding ethical reasoning. That could vary. I may think I understand it, but I really don't.
Yeah, that's right. So it's a self-report measure, right, of learning. I want to interject here something kind of cool. Have y'all ever heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect? So this, for those of you who haven't, it's sort of interesting. So the idea is often when people self-report their own competency when they don't know too much, is that they'll say that they're really competent at that thing. But then once they learn more about it, then their schema for that thing gets bigger and they realize how much they don't know. So even though they might know more later on, sort of their relative knowledge to now what they actually know is sort of their bigger universe of understanding is going to be smaller. So that's why you get some really funny self-report data on issues like ethical reasoning. Because most people, when you ask, are you a good ethical reasoner? Man, I am the best. But then it's like, well, what do you actually mean by ethical reasoning? It's like, they really don't have much of a definition. They learn more than like, okay. So anyway, fun aside. Okay. Again, so what else needs to be done to make this better? Oh yeah, I'm sorry. We'll use a mic. My apologies.
So they want to investigate why the students are reporting. They're looking at the self-report
Mm.
rather than the actual extent to which they understand ethical reasoning.
Yeah, exactly right. So you're putting a lot of emphasis on that self-report. Okay. So let's go ahead and move to the third report. Take on. Before you do that, a couple of questions. Who's that program lead faculty? Okay, give me one song that Whitney Houston sang. I want to dance with somebody. Sure, that's a great one. Okay, how about the department chair? Boy George. Could you imagine this actual department? It would be crazy. Okay, what's one song of Boy George? Karma Chameleon is the one I always think about, right? There's a bunch of good ones. I loved that band. Culture Club, right? Okay, so now let's go to example number 3. your task is the same. What is better about example 3 than example 2? But what else needs to be done? How else could it be better? Okay, I know that was a lot more to digest with that report than the previous one. And this is a big leap too in quality, right? From 2 to 3. So, in what ways did the third report exceed the second report? I'll excuse the mic.
The first thing is that there's a rubric, but also they justify the reasoning for the 3 classes that they're assessing.
Yeah, so she pointed out 2 important differences, right? And so, with respect to the courses and the experiences, that they're a lot more laid out. And so you can see how those particular actions might relate to the student learning outcome. And then, secondly, there's a rubric. There's also enough rationale to tell you how that rubric actually matches to the student learning outcome. And I say that because sometimes people say, oh, we just used a rubric. Well, how do I know that rubric actually dovetails with the student learning outcome? So they make a lot of effort to make a tie-in or a link between one area to the next. Thank you for that. How else is it better?
The outcome itself is more measurable than the previous one. The previous one was understanding what you can't measure.
Yeah.
And it's tied to something that students will be asked to do.
Yeah. So here's finally enough detail to give some direction as to what to teach, A, and B, how to assess it, right? So I often think about a good student learning outcome is something that has hooks in it. And so then you can hook other pieces of the processes into it. Whereas if you say understand ethical reasoning, it's just it's so amorphous. There's nothing sort of dangling there to hook your pedagogy or your curriculum into it, nor your assessment. Okay?
I think the tone is a little more sophisticated.
Okay. How so?
So they use some, in the second example, like missing the target, which is a little, I think, too casual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then what was nice is you notice that they divided up their scores to the outcome into 2 different areas. So there's 2 aspects of the rubrics that tied into the student learning outcome, and so they went into more depth and said there's one area that basically we hit or exceeded our target, and there's another area that we didn't. So it's a more sophisticated analysis as well. Yeah, thank you. Okay, another area this is better?
They define the points, so rather than just having a 1 to 4, they tell us what that means.
Sure.
And then they tell us who was assessed and, why they were all expected to take this class.
Yeah, so I think that was an issue that I was brought up at that table before, was that we didn't know the sample size, who was assessed, how many. This case we found out, well, hey, here's all the students who graduate from this program, and by the way, all of them took the assessment. So the sample, in this case, actually a census of students took it, right? Great, thank you. What else? Yeah.
They had a plan from the previous year that
Yeah.
they implemented, and so there was that closing the loop type thing that we had talked about before, and they were they provided explanation of what they did and how they did it and what they plan to do moving forward in the following academic year. So
Yeah.
there's a little bit of more narrative that explains their process.
Sure. I think too often an assessment report can be seen like it's just this one thing dangling in time, as opposed to sort of it is still capturing one point in time, but it's talking about this larger narrative of the program, what's been done in the past, where they hope to go in the future, and this report starts to put all those pieces together. That's nice. Any other comment? Sure, yeah.
The only thing that I found in the target for achievement, the use of the word endeavor, I think I'd have a harder target. In other words, the target would be students to average a good for both those sections.
Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, it may be a little wishy-washy.
And I kind of had a problem with average a good on both, because average, I mean, I would prefer to see that students attain at least a 2.
Right, okay.
Because averages, the way averages work, it
Sure,
might not, you might get some that fall below the radar that you're not catching.
Yeah, half of them could be below, right? Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that particular issue, I leave it up to programs how they want to define that success. But some programs will say, no, we can't. It has to be like all students need to reach this level or higher is another way that you could frame it. Other folks like it more like a statistical, like what's the average? I think either way could work kind of depending on the norms of that program. Do we have another comment?
So I think that the way that they reported their results is inconsistent with the assessment method they reported.
Okay.
They say students were midway between developing and good, and there is no developing on their rubric. It's marginal, good, and excellent, and the 1.5 is actually between good and excellent. At first I thought, maybe developing means marginal, but then when you look at the 1.5, it's actually between good and excellent.
That's
so
true.
There's
That's
some
true.
Inconsistent. Must have been 2 different people working on the report.
Could have been. Yeah, great. Thank you. Good eye, by the way. Okay, yeah, thanks for those comments. So I think we can all agree this is a lot better than the one before. And typically from area to area, things are tied in. Nevertheless, there's still some questions about what's going on. So, so we're going to have enough time to do the last one. So, again, tear out number 3 and start looking at number 4. And right before you do that, though, who is Falco? Jerry Comazar, yes. Anybody remember that one? And there's another one, big hit. A little song called Rock Me Amadeus. That was Falco. Yeah. Okay, and then In Cherry. Who is In Cherry? Opposite ends of the decade. Nana Cherry, that's right. Buffalo Stance. Yeah, so see, this gets a little harder here. Yeah, nice and scaffolded, yeah. Okay, so now let's do the same thing. Rip off report number 3 and look at number 4 and tell me how number 4 is better than number 3, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, y'all ready? Okay. So what's different in 4 than 3?
Well, aside from the obvious, they've defined their outcome a lot better, all their assessment methods, etc. It goes back to a point that you made at the beginning of the program today, which is they took their time and they're showing history and a progression of the improvement that they've made in the past 3 years. So it's not something that they just did from one year to the other. They've they look like they've really thought this out, and they have gone progressively. They have made changes and made improvements to the scores and to the ethical understanding that they wanted from their students.
Okay, can I hold on for just 1 second? So this is the first time I've heard the word improvement. So why do you say this is an improvement?
It's an improvement because it's a full analysis of the process from beginning to end. It has history, and it shows a progression of the steps that they took to make not just changes, but improvement.
Yeah, did y'all see that reassessment too? They talked about the area that was weak. They showed the different strategies that they used, and they reassessed, and they showed that that was an improvement. By the way, I cannot tell you how rare that is to see that in assessment reports, but that's not to say this report is not without its faults. It's got some faults, but yeah, it tells that story. Okay, yes.
One thing we see in it is a quality assurance of the assessment itself. So in other words, they had a rater training where they did a mock review so that all three assessors were doing similar methods, and then they did some statistics on it to show the similarity among the three.
Yeah, that's right. And so you're exactly right. There's a quality control about the assessment itself. Or another way to put it is there's validity evidence to suggest that the ratings were accurate relative to ethical reasoning.
And students were actually given the rubric, and they were given some pitfalls that previous students had run into with respect to doing this assignment. So the assignment was modeled, there was a modeling of the assessment requirements, and then they actually got to see it. And so they knew what they were being, they knew what, they were being held accountable to what. And they made their rubric, they really defined what a 2 was, and the 2 was their expectations, and good was what they wanted. And if you got a 3 or whatever, that obviously exceeded it. And that's a really hard thing that we're having here with our faculty, some of them, that if we have a 3-point or a 4-point scale, some faculty have problems with the fact that, you know, they think that their students are all 4s. And they're not always all 4s, they're all 3s, or if it's a 0, 1, 2, 3 scale, you know, 2 is your target, and that's what you expect. And I really like that they spelled that out here. And they use it.
And so in the passage, you realize in the report number 3, it said we want students to score a 3 or better on each part of this rubric. In this report, it actually spells out what the behavioral anchor is. So it tells you exactly with respect to what's being evaluated with ethical reasoning. So it's in more detail there. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was going to mention the uniformity as well, but also they give time frames. Like, for example, in Part A, it says students graduating. They actually give at this point, they're supposed to be able to do this. And also in Part C, they mention when they, at the end of the program, right before graduation, when they take that course.
That's right. Yeah, when I read this indicates to me that this is sort of the unit or program, sort of a learning improvement sort of organism. And it's like, okay, well, we found there was an issue in the past. We thought about that. We sort of fed it back into the system, and we're seeing that our newer students are actually doing better. And like I buy the argument to say the reason that they're improving is because of something that they did differently, in that story. Now, there's a lot more methodology that one could be asking for, but you also have to balance that with respect to like how much time the faculty have to, like this is one student learning outcome. Most programs have, 5, 10, sometimes 20. And so if I ever got this much detail, I would be so happy from the programs. We have a few examples of that, but this is on the kind of the top end that you would ever see.
Sorry. Okay. I don't want to be a downer. But...
Hey, yeah, I love it. Yeah, what's the downside?
So they clearly did a lot of work and improved the process and the documenting of the process, but I would be a little concerned. They improved in one area by 1 point, and they're ready to move on. So to me, that could be a blip. It could be rater error. It could be a number of things. Ideally, you would want to see some consistency in that level of improvement.
Sure.
Before you move on to something else.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've just been reading some articles on change theory, and so one of the articles I was reading was talking about what are some of the fatal mistakes that big businesses have made when they do change, and one of those fatal mistakes was declaring victory too soon. And so it's to say, because you have like one good cohort or one good group of products that you're just like, hey, we won. But in actuality, you need to carry it forth a little bit further to see if that is, indeed that change is a improvement in the long run. Yeah, thank you for that point. So I think we've got about 5 more minutes of questions we can have. I'm glad we were able to get through the whole thing. But I think it's kind of fun to see the forest of what assessment can look like. And again, the last piece, it just looks so much different than the ones before it, because it shows that just thoughtful process over years of programs taking seriously the results, reflecting upon them, doing something different, and then, again, revisiting the results and looking at the improvement. So what other questions or comments do you have?
The one comment that I will have is that it seems like the faculty is a lot more involved now than before. In other reports, they say, well, we will look into that. Yeah, it's okay. There will be a blip. Let's not pay too much attention. Here, they participate in workshops, they're really invested, and it shows a different attitude.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one could argue that those first 2 reports could have been written by one person. And that person might be taking the assessment burden on for him or herself, and nobody else is involved. Where the second 2, the report number 3 and 4 is clearly it's clear there that the many members of the program are thinking about this. Yeah, so thank you. Great comment. What else? Ma'am?
I think it's more about like how to design the assessment, how to kind of design the intervention. Because when I read the description of the session, I was thinking the session will kind of teach us or tell us perspectives about like you have the invention activities. It's just like how do you report the data and then activity. But when I compared those, what impressed me more is that what you do before the assessment report is really important.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. This has really shifted my thinking too, because I think I used to frame my work just on the assessment model, as opposed to thinking about a learning intervention and wrapping the assessment around it. And this is definitely, the last report is definitely, you're thinking about this learning system, learning environment, learning improvement, then thinking about how to wrap the assessment around it to tell the story. That's a very different way of thinking about assessment. And I know your point earlier, you're saying, hey, I'm involved with writing across the curriculum. How can the curricular piece and the assessment piece work together? That kind of gives you an insight as to what it might look like if you were to tell that story and people were working together on it. Okay, I do have 2 short, very important questions to ask. So there's 2 people on that last report. The first, I think, is the first D. Gahan. Yeah, you were on it, man. Yeah, so that's probably the hardest question. Dave Gahan, lead singer of Depeche Mode. Does anybody remember a Depeche Mode song? Personal Jesus, Can't Get Enough. Yeah, there's tons of great songs. That used to be around 1990, 1991, that was my favorite band. But they had some hits in the early 80s all the way through the early 2000s. Yeah, man, you were on it. That's great. Okay, then I threw an easy one for you guys. Yeah, a little Miami flavor back at you, right? And so what band was she lead singer of? That's right. And then she went solo. So then what was a song by Miami Sound Machine? What is it? Rhythms When It Gets You's 1. Oh, there's a Congo one. Yeah. There you go. Yeah, there. Okay, good. Yeah, this group is great for this item. Okay, and then when she was a solo artist, what was a song that she had? I think Get On Your Feet. Yes, that's a good one. Okay, good. Was there something like Going Into the Light or something? Coming Into the Light? Didn't she have like a... Was that a car accident or something that she was in? Yeah, bus accident. Yes. Yeah, that's right. That's right. So I know that's a really strange way to end a breakout session on assessment, but I appreciate y'all playing with me. I love 80s trivia. So, yeah. Oh, yeah, sure. Now McCarthy. Good. I was wondering if anybody would catch that. Great. That's right. Yeah, it's funny. How they're still living. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, so that issue though of Michael Jackson, buying the song that was an actual thing, right? And then he got that tip about buying these catalogs from Paul McCartney. It's sort of ironic relationship there. All right, well, y'all have a great rest of the day. Some of y'all might see you for the next round. All right, bye.